They dragged her through the dust by horse. Then one Lakota stood in the road. Sarah woke early, even before the sun had fully risen over the wide plains. The sky was painted in soft shades of pink and orange, and a gentle breeze swept across the tall grass that surrounded her family's small homestead. She pulled her shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside. The air was cool and carried the scent of dry earth and sweet grass. In that quiet morning, everything seemed peaceful, almost as if nothing could disturb it. Bay. She went straight to the small barn where the family's few animals were kept. A pair of cows, a mule, and a few chickens were part of their simple life, and Sarah had learned to care for them from her mother. She brushed the mule's mane with steady hands, humming softly. She loved the calm of these mornings. It reminded her that despite the hardships, life could still feel gentle and safe for a while. After feeding the animals, she walked toward the garden where her mother had planted beans, corn, and a few herbs. The soil was dry, but with careful watering and attention, the plants were growing well. Sarah knelt down and checked the young sprouts. She noticed a few small weeds and pulled them gently, careful not to disturb the tender roots. She loved the feeling of being connected to the earth, of seeing life grow because of her own hands. Her father was already out in the fields, checking the fence that separated their property from the open plains. The fence had been repaired many times over the years, but the wind and storms always tried to tear it apart. Sarah waved to him from the garden. He nodded and gave a tired smile. But life here was never easy. But their family had learned to face every day with patience and care.
Sarah's older brother Thomas was helping neighbors with their harvest today.
She knew he would return with stories and laughter in the evening. The small community of settlers worked closely together. Each family depended on the other, sharing tools, labor, and knowledge. They had learned that surviving in this harsh land meant more than just hard work. It meant trust, friendship, and the quiet courage to face whatever came. Despite the calm morning, Sarah sometimes felt a shadow of unease. She had heard stories from travelers and neighboring families about conflicts with the Lakota Sioux, who were struggling to protect their lands. These stories were always frightening, but Sarah also knew they were not simple tales of good and bad. The people who rode across the plains were defending their homes just as fiercely as her family defended theirs. It was a complicated world, and Sarah tried to understand it, even if it sometimes scared her. After breakfast, Sarah went to the small stream nearby to collect water. The sunlight danced on the surface, and she watched the fish dart among the rocks. She felt a strange mix of peace and tension. The land was beautiful, but it could be unforgiving. She thought of her mother, who had once told her, "The plains give life, but they also demand respect. Never forget that." Sarah understood her mother's words more each day.
As she carried the water back to the house, she noticed the wind picking up. Dust began to rise from the dry earth, forming small clouds that drifted across the open land.
It was a familiar sight, a reminder that storms could come quickly.
She hurried to finish her chores, bringing the water to her mother and checking on the animals. One last time.
Every day had to be planned carefully. Every moment counted. After the morning work was done, Sarah sat by the window, sewing a patch on her father's coat.
She liked these quiet moments. They allowed her to think, to dream, and to remember stories her grandmother had told her. Stories of courage, of love, and of survival. Sarah often imagined herself in those stories, brave and unafraid, even though she sometimes felt small in the vastness of the plains. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats in the distance. She looked out the window, squinting against the sunlight, but could see only dust rising far away. She hoped it was Thomas returning with the neighbors, bringing news and laughter. but a small part of her felt a knot of worry. The plains were wide and lonely, and it was easy for danger to approach without warning. Bah! She shook her head and returned to her sewing. Worry did not help anyone. Sarah had learned that life on the plains required focus, patience, and determination. She finished the patch and carefully folded the coat. Soon she would need to help her mother with preparing the midday meal. There was little time for fear in the routine of survival. By midday, the sun was high and harsh, beating down on the wooden roof of the small house. Sarah and her mother worked together, making bread and preparing a simple stew with vegetables from their garden. The aroma filled the house, warm and comforting. It reminded Sarah of home, of family, and of all the small joys that made life meaningful despite the challenges. After lunch, Sarah decided to check the western fence line. It was a task that required attention, especially during the dry season when the soil shifted and weakened the posts. As she walked, she kept her eyes on the horizon, scanning for any signs of trouble. She carried a small knife, not for fighting, but to cut rope or mend broken wood if needed. The open plains demanded vigilance at all times. As she reached the far fence post, she heard the distant sound of more hoofbeats, closer this time. Her heart skipped a beat. She paused, trying to tell whether it was someone she knew or a stranger. The sound grew louder, and the dust in the air shimmered in the sunlight. Bah! She thought of her family, of the safety of home, and of the stories of rage she had heard. For a moment, Sarah felt frozen, caught between fear and determination. She wanted to run, to hide, but the fence needed attention, and she could not abandon it. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. She reminded herself of her mother's words, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to face it."
The figure emerged from the dust. It was a rider mounted on a horse that moved swiftly across the plains.
Bend. Sarah's eyes widened as she tried to see clearly through the haze. She did not know yet whether this person was friend or foe. Her heart pounded, and her hands clenched the rope she carried. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. The plains were beautiful, but in moments like this, beauty felt distant and unreachable. All that mattered was survival, courage, and hope. Sarah took another deep breath, squared her shoulders, and prepared herself for whatever was coming. The rider slowed as he approached, his face hidden under a wide-brimmed hat. Dust swirled around him, and the horse's hooves left deep prints in the dry earth. Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. Was this someone coming to help, or someone bringing danger? She could not know yet. All she could do was wait and hope that her courage would carry her through. As the rider came closer, Sarah felt a mixture of fear and determination. Life on the plains had taught her many lessons. The importance of patience, the strength of family, and the unexpected moments that could change everything. She held her ground, ready to face the unknown, unaware that this day would become one she would never forget. The wind continued to whip across the grass, carrying with it the scents of dust, earth, and life. Sarah's heart beat fast, but she felt a strange calm beneath the fear. She knew that whatever happened next, she would need every ounce of courage she had learned from the plains, from her family, and from herself. And in that quiet, tense moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the events that would soon unfold, changing Sarah's life forever. Sarah had barely returned to the house from checking the fence when she noticed movement on the far horizon. At first, it looked like a ripple in the heat, but then she saw it more clearly. Horses moving fast, dust rising in thick clouds behind them. Her heart raced. She knew this could not be her brother or neighbors. They always traveled slowly and carefully. These riders were moving too quickly, too purposefully. She felt a sudden wave of fear, a sharp and icy feeling that made her chest tighten. She ran toward the house, shouting for her mother, but her voice barely carried over the sound of hooves thudding against the hard earth. The riders were closer now, and Sarah could see that they were not alone. Several figures, mounted on horses, were heading straight for the homestead. Her mind raced. She remembered the stories she had heard from neighbors about raids, about people taken by force, and she felt a chill run down her spine. By the time Sarah reached the back door, she realized she was too late. The riders were already at the edge of the yard. She could see them clearly now, faces determined, and she felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. Her mother appeared behind her, her hands trembling as she clutched a small knife for protection. The family's animals panicked, the cows bellowing and the chickens squawking. Chaos filled the air. One of the riders shouted something, but Sarah could not understand the words. The tone was sharp and commanding. They moved quickly, surrounding her small homestead. Sarah froze for a moment, unsure what to do. Her father had gone to check a distant fence earlier, and Thomas was away helping neighbors. She was alone with her mother, both of them small and unarmed against a group of determined men. Bah. Suddenly, one of the riders reached for Sarah. He grabbed her arm with surprising strength, pulling her off her feet. Breaths. She screamed, struggling, but the rider held her tightly. The other riders circled, shouting and urging their horses forward. Bang. Sarah's mother tried to step between them, but she was pushed back with a force that made her stumble. The world became a blur of dust, noise, and fear. Sarah felt herself dragged across the dry, hard earth as the horse moved forward. Dust filled her eyes, her lungs burned with every breath, and the ground scraped her skin. Bay. She clung to the rope that had somehow been thrown around her, her fingers raw and trembling. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, fear, confusion, disbelief. Bay. She had never imagined she would experience something so terrifying, so sudden. The sun beat down on her back and she tasted blood from small scrapes on her arms. Base. She tried to call out, to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the noise of the horses and the shouting men. Every step felt endless, as if time itself had slowed. Her thoughts turned to her family, her mother, her father, Thomas, and she hoped desperately that they were safe. The thought gave her strength to cling on, even when her arms ached and her legs felt weak. As the horse continued, Sarah noticed the horizon shifting again. Another figure appeared, moving steadily through the dust. Unlike the chaos of the raiders, this rider's movements were calm and deliberate. He rode with a quiet confidence, as if he knew exactly where he was going. Bay. Sarah could not tell who he was, but something about him gave her a flicker of hope. She tried to focus on that small thought, holding on to it like a lifeline. The dragging continued, relentless. Sarah's clothes were torn, her skin raw from contact with the rough ground, and the rope burned into her hands. She stumbled several times, falling behind slightly, only to be yanked forward again. The horse's hooves pounded the earth with a rhythm that made her stomach lurch. Fear pressed down on her like a heavy weight, but she refused to let it break her completely. Bay. Her mind wandered to stories her grandmother had told her about courage in impossible situations. She remembered the tale of a woman who had survived the plains by keeping her wits and never losing hope. Best. Sarah whispered a silent prayer that she could do the same. She tried to stay calm, focusing on breathing, on keeping her hands from slipping off the rope, on surviving each moment. Bet. Minutes, or maybe hours, passed in a haze of pain and dust. Sarah could barely tell how far they had gone. The landscape blurred together, dry grass, rolling plains, and the occasional cactus. The riders showed no signs of slowing down. The sun climbed higher, relentless and burning, and Sarah felt faint from exhaustion. Every inch of her body ached. Her back, arms, and legs were scraped and bruised. Her lungs ached from dust and exertion. Yet she refused to give in completely to despair.
Then something unusual happened.
The calm rider in the distance moved closer, cutting a path through the dust with a steady and purposeful motion. Unlike the raiders, he did not shout or act with aggression. He simply rode forward, his posture confident, his eyes fixed on the chaos. Sarah could not understand why, but the sight made her heart beat faster, not with fear, but with a fragile hope.
The raiders seemed to notice him as well. Their shouting stopped briefly, replaced by a tense silence.
Sarah's stomach twisted as she realized that this stranger might be about to intervene, but she had no idea what would happen next. Her body was weak, her arms numb, but she clung to the rope, bracing herself for the unknown. The rider slowed his horse and stepped directly into the path of the raiders. His movements were calm but commanding. Sarah could not see his face clearly, but his presence seemed to stop the raiders in their tracks. The shouting faded, replaced by tense silence. The dust swirled around them, the sun creating long shadows across the plains. It was as if the world had paused for a single, crucial moment. Sarah felt something she had not felt in a long time. A sense of protection. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with a small, stubborn hope.
She realized that survival often depended on moments like this, moments where courage and humanity could make a difference, even in the midst of danger.
The raiders hesitated, looking from each other to the lone rider. He did not speak, did not threaten, but his calm authority was enough. Slowly, almost reluctantly, the raiders began to pull back. Sarah's heart leapt. Could it be true? Could she really be safe after this terrifying ordeal? As the raiders retreated, Sarah fell to the ground exhausted, her body sore and covered in dust. She struggled to sit up, her hands trembling. The stranger rode closer now, stopping beside her. He extended a hand, steady and strong. For the first time since the attack began, Sarah felt the weight of fear lift slightly. She did not know this man, did not know why he had intervened, but she knew he had saved her life. She took his hand, grateful beyond words, and allowed herself a small moment of relief. The plains were still wide, still harsh, and danger could return at any time. But for now, she was alive. And in the distance, as the dust settled, she saw the retreating raiders disappear over the horizon. Sarah's body shook, but her mind was sharp with the realization that courage could come from unexpected places. She would never forget this day, never forget the terror she had felt, and never forget the quiet hero who had stepped into the road to protect her. The plains could be cruel, but they could also reveal the strength and humanity in people in the most unexpected ways. Sarah's body ached from the long ride, the scraping of the rope on her skin, and the fear that had gripped her for what felt like hours. Her lungs burned from the dust, and her legs trembled with exhaustion, yet she could hardly tear her eyes from the figure standing in the distance. The lone rider on the plains was not like the others. His posture was calm, steady, and certain. He did not shout, wave weapons, or seem aggressive. Instead, he simply stood his ground, facing the raiders as if he belonged to the land itself. The dust swirled around him, sunlight catching on the edges of his clothing and his horse. Sarah had never seen anyone ride like that before.
There was no hurry, no panic, only quiet strength.
She could feel something in the air shift, a tension that was no longer only fear. The raiders, who had been shouting and urging her along, began to slow, their horses snorting and stamping in the dirt. They looked toward the lone figure as if unsure how to respond.
Sarah tried to sit up, her arms shaking from the rope that still held her.
The pain in her legs made her wince, and her back throbbed with bruises. But she forced herself to focus. The rider was coming closer now, moving with the deliberate rhythm of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Each step of his horse seemed to carry authority, and Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this man could help her.
Perhaps he could stop this nightmare. The lead raider, a tall man with a rough face, leaned forward in his saddle and shouted,
"Bay." Sarah could not understand the words, but the tone was sharp, commanding, and threatening. The other raiders looked at him and then at the approaching figure. For a moment, there was silence, thick, heavy, and tense. The plains themselves seemed to pause, the wind stilling slightly as if waiting for the next moment. The lone rider stopped in the center of the path, directly in the line of the raiders. He did not draw a weapon. He did not shout or demand anything. He simply sat tall in the saddle, his eyes steady, and his presence alone seemed to hold the chaos at bay. Sarah could feel her chest lift with a strange mixture of fear and relief. Whoever this man was, he had done something incredible. He had made the raiders hesitate. The lead raider frowned, clearly frustrated. Bah. He gestured sharply to the others, but they did not move forward. The air was tense with unspoken conflict. Her knuckles white and watched the interaction with wide eyes. She could not understand the words, but she understood the meaning. The lone rider was not afraid, and that fearlessness was powerful. Minutes passed like hours. Sarah felt her heart hammering, her mind racing with every possible outcome. What if the raiders ignored him? What if they attacked anyway? G tried to steady her breathing, reminding herself to stay calm despite the fear. She focused on the ground beneath her, the rope in her hands, and the steady figure on the horse. She tried to believe in the possibility of safety. Slowly, the leader of the raiders began to speak again. His voice was lower, more measured. Sarah could tell he was thinking, trying to decide whether to continue or retreat. The other riders watched, shifting nervously in their saddles. The lone rider remained calm, unwavering. He did not move closer aggressively, but he did not move back either. His confidence seemed to create a line the raiders could not cross. Sarah's body shook with exhaustion, but she felt a glimmer of something she had not felt in hours: hope. The fear was still there, raw and intense, but the presence of the lone rider gave her a sense that she might survive this. She whispered a silent prayer, thanking the unknown figure for his courage, for standing between her and danger. The standoff continued, each side carefully watching the other. Boast. Sarah noticed small details, the way the rider's horse shifted its weight calmly, how his hands rested lightly on the reins, how his eyes never wavered from the raiders. There was a quiet dignity about him, a strength that did not rely on violence but on courage and presence. Bay.
Sarah found herself admiring him, even in her fear. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the leader of the raiders lowered his head slightly and gestured to the others.
Back. Slowly, reluctantly, they began to turn their horses. The sound of hooves faded as they moved away, leaving a trail of dust behind them. Sarah could hardly believe it. She was alive. The nightmare was ending, and it was because of this brave stranger who had stepped into their path without fear. When the raiders were gone, the lone rider guided his horse towards Sarah. Besh struggled to sit up, her body trembling with pain and relief. The rope that had bound her hands was still there, but she did not resist. She had learned over the past hours that fighting would not help. Survival required patience and trust in those who acted with courage. The rider stopped beside her, his presence calm and reassuring.
He leaned down slightly, offering a hand to help her up.
Sarah took it, grateful beyond words. His hands were strong and steady, and for the first time since the attack began, she felt a small measure of safety. She could see now that he was not just a stranger, but someone who understood the ways of the plains, someone who valued life and courage over violence. Sarah's legs were weak as she stood, supported by the rider. Her arms ached, her back throbbed, and her clothes were torn and dusty. But she could feel her spirit lift. Brace. The fear that had consumed her for hours began to fade, replaced by relief and gratitude.
She looked up at the rider, wanting to speak, but words failed her.
She could only nod, silently acknowledging that he had saved her life. The rider gave her a small, calm nod in return. He did not speak immediately, letting the moment settle. Sarah felt a strange sense of respect and understanding between them.
Words were not always needed on the plains. Sometimes courage, presence, and action said more than any speech could.
After a moment he spoke softly, explaining in simple terms that the raiders were gone and that she was safe for now. Sarah listened intently, grateful for the clarity. Best. Her mind was still spinning from the events, but she clung to his words, feeling the tension ease slightly. She realized that survival often depended not only on quick thinking but also on the unexpected kindness and bravery of others. The rider helped Sarah toward a small cluster of trees near the homestead. There she could rest without being in the open. He gave her water from a small container, and she drank slowly, savoring each cool sip. Her body was exhausted, but her mind was sharp, and she could begin to process what had just happened.
She had been dragged across the plains, threatened by raiders, and yet she had survived thanks to the courage of this stranger. As she rested, Sarah's thoughts turned to her family. She hoped they were safe, that the attack had not harmed them. She also thought about the raiders and why the lone rider had stopped them. There was a lesson here, she realized. A lesson about bravery, morality, and the power of standing for what is right. Even in a world filled with fear and danger, courage and humanity could prevail. The rider remained nearby, not intrusive but protective. Sarah felt a strange comfort in his quiet presence. She did not know his name, nor did she know where he had come from, but she knew she owed him her life. Slowly, she began to feel a tiny spark of hope for the future, despite the pain and fear she had endured. Hours passed as Sarah recovered her strength, leaning on the rider and drinking in the calm that had replaced chaos. The plains around them were quiet now, dust settling over the land, sunlight reflecting off the golden grass. The world felt vast, harsh, and beautiful all at once. Sarah realized that life on the plains was never simple, but moments like this, moments of courage and humanity, made it worth living. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Sarah understood that she would never forget this day. She had faced fear, pain, and uncertainty, and she had survived. More importantly, she had witnessed the power of courage and compassion in the most unexpected way. The plains could be dangerous, but they could also reveal the best in people, even in the harshest conditions. For the first time since the attack began, Sarah felt a sense of calm. She knew the journey was not over, that challenges still lay ahead, but she also knew that she was not alone. Courage, kindness, and hope could exist even in the dustiest, most dangerous places. And as she looked at the rider beside her, she felt grateful that such humanity could shine through even in the darkest moments. Sarah sat quietly under the shade of a small tree, her body still trembling from exhaustion and the injuries she had endured. The dust from the plains clung to her hair and clothes, and her skin was scraped and sore. She took a deep breath, feeling the coolness of the evening air against her face, and tried to steady herself. For the first time since the attack, she felt a small measure of calm, a sense that the worst was over.
The Lakota warrior who had saved her remained nearby, his horse grazing calmly. He did not crowd her, did not speak harshly, but instead allowed her to regain her strength at her own pace. Psst. Sarah found herself watching him carefully. His presence was quiet but commanding, and there was a sense of dignity and calm about him that made her feel safe. She did not know his name, yet she already felt a deep respect for him. After a while, the warrior spoke softly. Bird. His voice was calm, measured, and carried a strange warmth. He asked if she was hurt, and if she needed water. Pay. Sarah nodded, grateful for the concern. She took a small sip from the container he offered, savoring the cool liquid as it slid down her throat. It was a simple gesture, but to Sarah it felt like a lifeline. The small acts of care reminded her that even in the harsh world of the plains, kindness and humanity could still be found. As she rested, Sarah thought about what had just happened. The attack, the fear, the pain, all of it had been overwhelming. Yet she realized that she had survived. More than that, she had seen courage in action. The warrior had stepped into danger without hesitation, standing between her and the raiders. He had not acted out of anger or revenge, but out of a sense of duty and honor. Sarah found herself wondering about the lessons she could learn from him. Finally, she found her voice. "Why did you help me?" she asked softly. Her voice was hoarse from shouting and dust, but she needed to understand. The warrior looked at her with calm, dark eyes. He did not smile, but there was a quiet understanding in his gaze. He explained in simple words that taking care of others, protecting the innocent, and showing courage were important. He said that fear should not guide actions, and that every person had the choice to act with honor. Sarah listened intently. His words were different from anything she had ever heard. They were not lectures or warnings, but a way of seeing the world that made sense even amidst danger. She realized that the plains were not just a place of hardship. They were a place where character, courage, and humanity could shine. She felt a spark of admiration and hope. Perhaps, she thought, she could learn to face challenges with the same calm strength the warrior had shown. As the evening continued, the warrior helped Sarah back toward her homestead. The house was quiet now, the animals calming after the chaos of the attack. Her mother had been searching desperately for her and rushed forward as soon as she saw Sarah approaching. Tears filled her mother's eyes, but there was also relief and gratitude. Sarah felt her own eyes grow wet. She had feared she might never see her family again. And now, here she was, safe and alive. Her mother gently examined her injuries. There were scrapes, bruises, and raw spots where the rope had rubbed her skin, but thankfully nothing was broken. Sarah winced as her mother carefully cleaned the wounds and applied simple ointments. She whispered words of comfort and encouragement, reminding Sarah of her strength. "You are brave," her mother said. "You faced fear and survived." That is courage. Sarah smiled weakly, feeling the truth of those words in her heart. The warrior waited outside, allowing Sarah and her mother to have a moment together. When Sarah finally turned to him, she felt a mix of gratitude and curiosity. She wanted to understand more about him, about his culture, and about why he had chosen to act with such courage. He simply nodded, understanding her unspoken questions, and stayed silent, letting action speak louder than words. Over the next few days, Sarah began to regain her strength. The warrior remained nearby, sometimes helping repair fences, sometimes guiding her to check the animals. His presence was steady, never intrusive, but always protective. Sarah noticed small lessons in his actions: the careful attention to the land, the respect for all living creatures, the quiet patience that allowed him to observe and act wisely. Sarah's mind often drifted back to the attack and the moment when he had stood in the path of the raiders. She realized how courage did not always mean fighting or shouting. Sometimes courage meant standing firm, protecting others, and acting with calm authority. The lesson was clear, and she began to feel a new sense of confidence in herself. Perhaps, she thought, she could face life on the plains with courage like his, even without a horse or a weapon to defend her. Her father returned a few days later. He had been checking distant fences and had heard about the raid from neighbors. When he saw Sarah safe and the warrior nearby, he was stunned and grateful. He offered thanks, but the warrior simply nodded. For him, words were not necessary. The act of helping, of protecting life, was enough. Sarah noticed her father's admiration and realized that bravery and honor could cross all boundaries, whether of family, community, or culture. Balance. Life slowly returned to routine. The garden needed care, the animals needed feeding, and the fences needed repairs. Breath. Yet the memory of the attack and the warrior's courage stayed with Sarah. She found herself paying closer attention to the land, noticing small details that had once gone unnoticed. The wind, the behavior of animals, the way the sunlight shifted across the plains. Everything seemed alive and important.
She realized that survival depended not just on hard work, but on observation, patience, and understanding.
Sarah also began to notice the warrior's quiet kindness. He did not demand gratitude, did not seek recognition. He acted with humility, showing that true courage was not about pride but about responsibility. Sarah felt a deep respect for him, realizing that there were many ways to be brave and that sometimes the quietest actions were the most powerful. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the warrior spoke again. He told Sarah stories about his people, about the plains, and about life in a way that was simple but full of meaning. He spoke of respect for others, for nature, and for the balance of life. Sarah listened, captivated by the wisdom in his words. She realized that the attack had not just tested her courage, but had also given her the chance to learn from someone wise and brave. The days passed, and Sarah's body healed, but her mind and spirit grew stronger. She found herself more confident, more observant, and more patient. The fear that had once consumed her began to fade, replaced by understanding and resilience. She understood that the plains were a harsh and challenging place, but also a place where lessons of courage, honor, and humanity could be found in the most unexpected moments. As Sarah reflected on the events, she began to see her world differently. She realized that danger was always present, but so was the opportunity for courage and compassion. The attack, though terrifying, had shown her that people could act with integrity, even when fear was strong. She also realized that she had the strength to survive, to act wisely, and to face challenges with courage. By the time the sun fully set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Sarah felt a sense of peace she had not felt in days. She looked at the plains stretching endlessly before her, knowing they were beautiful but unpredictable. She glanced at the warrior who had saved her life and guided her through recovery, and felt deep gratitude. She knew she would carry the lessons of this day with her forever. That night, as she lay in bed, Sarah thought about the future. She thought about her family, her home, and the plains that both challenged and nurtured her. She understood that life could be harsh, but that courage, patience, and compassion could make even the hardest moments meaningful. Perhaps. And she knew that the memory of the warrior who had stood in the road and changed her life would never leave her heart. Days turned into weeks, and the small homestead slowly returned to its usual rhythm.
Sarah had recovered from her injuries, though the memory of the attack remained vivid in her mind. Every morning as she stepped outside and felt the sun warm her face, she thought about the vastness of the plains and the fragility of life within them.
She knew now that the world could be cruel, but it could also reveal extraordinary courage and humanity in the most unexpected moments. Sarah often found herself thinking about the Lakota warrior who had saved her. She did not know his name, and she might never see him again, but his presence had left an indelible mark on her life. She remembered the way he had stood firmly in the path of the raiders, calm and unwavering, showing a strength that did not rely on weapons or violence. In her heart, she understood that true courage could exist in quiet actions, in restraint, and in protecting others without seeking recognition. Life on the plains was never easy. Each day required work, care, and attention. The fields had to be tended, the animals fed, and the fences repaired. Bang. Sarah threw herself into these tasks with renewed determination. She noticed small details she had once overlooked: the direction of the wind, the behavior of the animals, the patterns in the clouds. She had learned that observing the land and understanding it could mean the difference between safety and danger. Her family also noticed a change in Sarah. She seemed calmer, more focused, yet stronger, in a quiet way. Her mother often remarked on how brave she had been during the attack, and her father expressed deep gratitude to the warrior, even though words could never fully capture the depth of their feelings. Sarah realized that courage was contagious, not in a loud, boastful way, but through example. The warrior's actions had inspired her and her family, reminding them of the power of selflessness and bravery. One afternoon, Sarah took a walk toward the distant hills, carrying a small basket of food to leave for travelers or neighbors passing through. She thought about the plains, the wind, and the dust that had once seemed frightening. Now she saw beauty and life in every detail. She noticed a hawk circling above, the grass swaying gently, and the sun casting long shadows across the land. Everything felt connected, alive and meaningful. She realized that survival was not only about facing danger, but also about appreciating the small, enduring moments of life. As she walked, Sarah's thoughts returned to the warrior. She wondered about his life, his family, and the people he cared for. She imagined the lessons he had learned from his community in the land, lessons that he had shared with her in his actions more than in words. She thought about the values he had demonstrated: honor, compassion, patience, and courage, and she resolved to carry those lessons with her throughout her life. When Sarah returned to the homestead, she found her mother tending the garden. Together they worked quietly, side by side. Sarah realized that the ordinary tasks of life, the planting, the feeding, the repairing, were themselves acts of courage and resilience. Every day required effort and care, and every small action mattered. She felt a growing sense of purpose, knowing that she could face whatever challenges came with the strength she had gained from her experiences. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Sarah stood outside and looked across the plains. She thought about the attack, the fear she had felt, and the warrior who had intervened. She realized that her life had changed in ways she could not fully describe. She had been tested, but she had survived. And in surviving, she had learned about courage, hope, and the importance of human kindness. Sarah also reflected on the people around her, the neighbors who had helped each other, her family who had worked tirelessly to maintain their home, and even the raiders who had forced her to face her deepest fears. She understood that life was not simply divided into good and bad, friend and enemy. It was more complex than that. It was about choices, actions, and the way people treated each other even in the most difficult circumstances. The warrior's example stayed with Sarah. She thought about the way he had stood calmly and firmly, confronting danger without aggression. She realized that courage was not always loud or forceful. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and deliberate. Sometimes it was the decision to protect someone else, to act with integrity, and to face fear with calm resolve. Sarah understood that she could carry the same courage within herself, not only for her own survival but also to help others when the time came.
Over the following months, Sarah shared her experiences with her family and neighbors.
Best. She spoke about the fear, the pain, and the terror of the attack, but she also spoke about hope, courage, and humanity. People listened, learning from her story. They were inspired not only by her survival but also by the lessons she had learned from the warrior who had stood in the road. Her story became a quiet legend in the community, a reminder that even in the harshest circumstances, human kindness and bravery could make a difference. Sarah also began to see her own growth. She noticed that she approached challenges differently now. But she was more patient, more observant, and more confident in her decisions. She realized that fear was a natural part of life, but it did not have to control her. Courage, resilience, and compassion could guide her through even the most difficult moments. She felt stronger, not only in body but in spirit, knowing that she had faced the plains' harsh realities and survived. One spring morning, as flowers began to bloom and the grass grew greener, Sarah walked toward the small hills beyond the homestead. She carried a basket of fresh vegetables and bread, leaving them at the edge of the path for travelers, just as she had before. Breaths. She felt a sense of connection to the land, to the people around her, and to the lessons she had learned. The plains were still wide and unpredictable, but she no longer felt small or helpless. She felt capable, aware, and ready for whatever lay ahead. As she paused to look at the horizon, she imagined the warrior riding across the plains, but she hoped he was safe, that he continued to act with the courage and integrity she had witnessed. She realized that his actions had not only saved her life, but had also shaped the person she was becoming. Best. She felt gratitude that went beyond words, a deep sense of respect and admiration for someone who had risked everything for the sake of another. Sarah understood now that life was full of moments that tested character. Some were terrifying, some were joyful, and some were quiet. Everyday acts of care and responsibility. The plains had shown her all of these things, the danger, the beauty, and the humanity that could exist even in harsh conditions. She felt ready to carry these lessons forward, to live with courage, compassion, and awareness, and to honor the example she had been shown. As evening fell and the sky turned a deep shade of purple, Sarah returned to her home. The lights from the small windows glowed warmly, and she could hear the soft sounds of her family preparing for the night. She felt a sense of peace and gratitude, knowing that she had survived, learned, and grown. The plains remained wide, wild, and sometimes dangerous, but she had learned that courage, humanity, and hope could shine through even in the darkest moments. Sarah lay down that night, thinking of the warrior, of the raiders, of her family, and of the lessons she had learned. She understood that life would continue to be challenging, but she was no longer afraid. She carried with her the knowledge that courage was not always about fighting, but about standing firm, protecting others, and acting with integrity. Prepared, she felt a deep sense of purpose, knowing that the events of that day had shaped her into a stronger, wiser, and more compassionate person. And as she drifted into sleep, Sarah dreamed of the plains in a new light, vast, beautiful, and alive. She dreamed of courage in action, of humanity in moments of fear, and of hope that could endure even in the harshest conditions. She knew that the plains would continue to test her, but she was ready. She carried the lessons of the warrior in her heart, and with that, she felt capable of facing whatever the future might bring.